Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jones Zone. We're blessed with the presence of Walt Tamulinas. Walt has been in real estate forever. He's extraordinarily knowledgeable. We're going to talk about avoid litigation after the sale. So this is obviously a real hot topic. Nobody wants to go to court. And so hopefully these are going to be some things that will help you avoid going to court or any sort of litigation. Walt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been in real estate for many years, almost 50 years now. I started right out of college, my first job, and I've been a real estate owner of a real estate company since then. And our company is a full-service company. We do mortgage, escrow, title insurance, property management, development, syndication, consulting, but mostly residential resale. And so the thrust of our company, the general nature of our company is residential resale. And I'm going to start by talking about a couple of Latin words because I think these have a lot to do. When you get into litigation, you're going to hear a lot of Latin. And so the first one is caveat emptor. And everybody knows that means let the buyer beware. And so we have many situations where a homeowner thinks, well, if we can not talk about this, maybe we'll get away with it. We don't need to tell them. And that has gone many, many years ago. Caveat emptor does not exist anymore.
In fact,
in real estate.
I have it basically saying kind of a general rule, but this is not the only rule. But if you're thinking you should disclose something or not disclose it, then you probably need to disclose it.
Right. Well, my agents ask me, do you think we should disclose? The answer is always yes. There's no other answer. And the other Latin term is ex post facto, which means after the fact. And so all the problems occur after escrow closes. Now, seller's happy, they got their price, they're moved to their new home, they moved out of state, whatever they're doing, they're moving on with their life, they're retiring. And the last thing they need is a lawsuit after they sell their property. And typically it's the buyer that would file the lawsuit because there's this sense that they want a warranty on the house. And so all of our resales, we sell homes that are 100 years old, we sell homes that are 10 years old, and there's always something that needs to be done. We have these physical inspections, you always find something, but the problems always occur ex post facto, after the fact. So today, I think we should talk a little bit about how do you avoid some of those issues that happen after the fact. It's the seller's responsibility upon the sale to do the proper disclosure. And we have two forms that are really, really important in a real estate transaction. One is a TDS, which is the transfer disclosure statement. It gives the seller the opportunity to talk about all the things that could be wrong with the house and, things, encroachments, and they put their block wall 6 inches onto the neighbor's property line and things like that. The other one is called the SPQ, the Seller Property Questionnaire. And this is one in-depth that asks questions, like 3 pages worth of questions to the seller. Are there any neighborhood nuisances? Is there any reason why, is there noise, airport noise? Is there a dog barking,
I was going to say, because oftentimes sellers get a little bit intimidated by that due to the fact that they think, well, gosh, I can't possibly remember everything, which of course they can't. However, these questionnaires are designed to jog their memory, so it's pretty darn thorough.
And, sometimes I think, well, I fixed that so I don't have to talk about it anymore. Well, yeah, you do have to talk about it. And there's these certain rules, regulations, and statutes that require them to do that. And so full disclosure really means over disclosure. And as we said, if the question is, should I disclose? The answer is always yes. And so you can't give too much. And the seller's position is this, God, I'm going to tell them so many things negative about my house and nobody's going to want to buy it. And fortunately enough, in the market that we're in right now, people will take a house that's got a hole in the roof. And not worry about repairing it as long as you disclose that it's there.
I tell people oftentimes about disclosure and the importance and the legality of it is, look, you can actually legally sell a house. You can have cement all in the plumbing. You can have all the electrical wires pulled out. However, it's legal only if you disclose that that's all done. Point being is disclose. In fact, it's funny, I don't know if you remember this, but we had an attorney, because the real estate agents we do our walkthrough and our disclosure as well. And the attorney put up on the screen for our continuing education that you provide the office, the statement that said, small settling cracks in driveway. And in a room full of real estate agents, and an attorney asks, does anybody see anything wrong with this disclosure? And everybody goes, no, it seems pretty good to us. And the attorney said, no, And the problem was small, for starters. Don't use adjectives because small is subjective. We don't, it's small to you. It may be large to the buyer. So just put cracks. And then when did you become a geologist? How do you know it's a settling crack? So we really have to be careful. And with the words we use too, just I think his recommendation was cracks in driveway.
Yeah, that one word, they'll take you and beat you on the head with it in court. You said it was small. It's not small. It's interesting. You and I had a situation where you had a home and there was an oil field next door, and that's a big red flag. And so the owner was saying, yeah, they're doing fracking over there. And so we said, well, wait a minute now. What are you talking about? Well, I hear fracking noises coming from next door. No. You hear noises coming from the field next door. And so we don't know if it's fracking. You go over there and take a picture of the fracking machine, it could be one of those pumpers making noise. So noise and to say occasional, I wouldn't say occasional, I wouldn't say it happens at night. I would say, I hear noise from the field next door. Simple as that. Back to the seller's responsibility. Here's something really simple that happens in this market, especially. We have to sell a home, as you know, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times sometimes, And so buyer gets into escrow and they do a physical inspection and they review the physical inspection and they say, okay, I'm not going to buy the house. And so the assumption for everyone in the transaction is, well, the reason they're not buying the house is because they didn't like the physical inspection. They just changed their mind, or they bought another house, or they found another one they like better. So there's this physical inspection that exists from the first buyer. Here's something that's missed all the time. When the second buyer comes along, or the third buyer comes along, or the fourth buyer comes along, they all have to get all the inspections that have already been performed on the property. And here's why. 3 inspectors will find 3 different sets of issues. And so, one may not discover what was on the first inspection. Another mistake that's made is, well, we give them the inspection and the agent that represents the buyer says, oh, we'll just use that inspection. No. You get your own inspection. We don't want to influence you. A seller wants the buyer to find absolutely everything that's wrong with this property that they can possibly find. You want to find everything. And, in some situations, in some markets, that can be a problem. If there's a crack in the slab, it's hard to sell a home like that. Or if it needs a lot of deferred maintenance, it's hard to sell a home like that. In this market, not so much, because there's just such little inventory. So
I'd like to touch a little bit on that point of encouraging the buyer to choose the inspector. We do that for one primary reason is because if the inspector does miss something, it's, hey, you chose the inspector. We didn't choose the inspector. I mean, that's kind of relevant. That also needs to be, I think, something that's important, right?
Yeah, and we can make recommendations because we have good ones that we know that are thorough and find lots of stuff. But, we don't want to be responsible. So we can give a list of inspectors that we know to be credible. But it's always good if the buyer would select their own inspector, go out there and find them out. And that inspection stuff, that's the Wild West because there's really there's no licensing for that. It's like, I want to be an inspector. I'm going to start being an inspector today. Many of the inspectors come from the construction industry or have had something to do with, building homes in the past. And, maybe they're a plumber or an electrician or a general contractor, and they have a lot of knowledge. But, it could be Joe, the donut delivery guy, decided he wants to be an inspector, and he can be an inspector.
The inspector shows up, and he's got sugar all over his mouth. You might want to ask him a few questions.
Hot or powdered sugar from the donuts, right?
Yeah. All right.
And another one that we miss a lot is neighborhood nuisances. Cute story. I think it worked out okay, but the neighbor had some barking dogs, and we represented the seller, and he's got a dog that's barking with the dogs next to him in the back, and the dogs are barking through the fence, arguing rah, 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 all the time barking. And so the way he solved the problem was he moved his dog. I'm going to solve this problem. I get rid of the dog. Well, the new neighbor, the new buyer moves in and has little children. And I guess he's got some goats or something in the backyard.
Chickens, if I think.
Thank you, chickens.
Yes.
And it bothered the dogs. And these dogs next door were like, they're really big, grizzly, monster dogs, like Rottweilers or something like that. They found out that there were some issues recorded with the local municipality about complaints between the dogs barking. And so the issue came up after the close. Well, why didn't you tell us that these dogs next door were a nuisance? Our seller, our client, thought, well, they'd solve the problem. their dog was fighting with them, so he got rid of the dog. He moved the dog over to his daughter's house,
His
right?
dog.
And so what should have happened? Well, there are dogs in the back, in the back that bark, and so he should have made them aware of that, and that would have neutralized the whole thing. We ended up in small claims, and as you remember, it got settled in small claims. But that was kind of interesting, that the seller thought he solved the problem, but he didn't. So what was the issue? The neighbor's dogs. That was the issue, and that should have been disclosed. So neighborhood nuisances. The husband and wife across the street are fighting. They get drunk and they beat each other up once a week, and they break all the windows in the house and light the lawn on fire.
So this is for my neighbors.
Yes. So you got to disclose this stuff. We have a situation where we have a client wanting to move out of his house, and the neighbor has been exposing himself to him. The neighbor likes him and exposes himself to him. And so it's like, well, you got to disclose this stuff. Yeah, it's weird. And to the point where
you don't always have to have photos.
Getting a restraining order. This guy got so is that stuff that may be a motivation for why a seller's moving, and that has to be disclosed. So you say, gosh, how do I sell my home? Well, you have to disclose that because it is a nuisance in the neighborhood. And it's kind of inevitable that stuff happens after the close of escrow. When we shut utilities down and then the new buyer turns utilities on, I always recommend that you don't shut them off. Just let them be continuous. And then, the water meter kind of goes from one to the next and the gas goes from one to the next. It seems like when you shut these darn water systems down and you refire them back up, or the water heater down and you refire it back up, inevitably the water heater blows up. And so, you got a new buyer in their new home and their water heater doesn't work. We hear this all the time. I don't have any hot water. There's something wrong with the hot water heater. And there's a question whether or not the home protection insurance that's on almost every transaction will cover that water heater or not. And so, you got to make sure that you coordinate that with the buyer so you don't shut those systems down. And I guess it puts some extra, strain on the system when you shut those systems down.
And oftentimes it's just something simple like a pilot light that's out, frankly. But
yeah, easy stuff. And so when these little nitpicky things happen after the close of escrow, my strong recommendation is that the seller take care of them and just say, yeah, no problem. I'll get you a new water heater. No problem. Yeah, I'll get you let me get the valve. Let me fix that leaky, hose bib. No problem. We'll take care of that for you. Typically it'll stop. And when you take that little thing and you say no to it, then it gets into this big, crazy problem, all the other things that are wrong with the house. And that still doesn't stop one from filing litigation. In California, I think there's a statistic like 40% of all the attorneys in the United States are licensed in California or New York. So we have a highly litigious state. And as a result, you have to be very, very aware of this caveat emptor and knowing that after the fact, there's going to be problems. So one of my recommendations is some home protection companies, Crest would be one. They offer a home protection for the working systems in the home. And it's a nominal fee that the seller will pay, maybe $550, maybe $600 to cover the pool. Sometimes you can cover the roof. There's an extra added insurance that a buyer can buy with some of these home protection.
Or warranty would probably be.
It's litigation insurance after the fact. So these companies will cover between $25,000 to $50,000 in legal fees or settlement fees after the close of escrow. So there's a fee associated with that, $500, $1,000, $2,000, and it's probably worth it. If it's always important for the seller to check and see if that is available for them. Because again, they want to move and get this house behind them. They don't want to have to be stuck with, the problems on this house for the rest of their life.
Well, another thing too, thinking of things that could help prevent any sort of litigation is, I know that we've in the past through discovery, if the buyer does find something that's a pretty big deal, whether it's a leak in the roof or a crack in the slab or et cetera, we'll give a credit in lieu of that. And what's really great, and that you've helped out a lot with, and our attorney, is just to have them sign a release. That's another level of protection. So in other words, if we're giving some credit of $10,000 or $20,000 or something like that, you want to explain on that, touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. So we have a document that has a 1542 clause in it, which is a general release. It says, hey, look, when when a seller makes a concession, the buyer finds a whole bunch of things wrong with the house. And that's very typical. They find it, 20 to 50 things wrong, something from a ground fault interrupter to a light switch doesn't work, or the window doesn't open properly, to major things like, cracks in the foundation. And when those things come up during the transaction, it's the buyer makes what's called a request for repairs, RR, and the seller does what's called a response to the request to repairs. It's another negotiation after we're in escrow, basically, where the buyer says, look, this is what I want you to do, and the seller says, this is what I'll do. And when that happens, sometimes it gets reduced to a money thing. And I like it when the seller is just given a credit. The reason why is if the seller says, yeah, let me get my handyman, let me get my contractor, let me get everybody out here to work on it, then there's a problem later on. Well, we picked the guy that fixed it. Let's not do that. If we can reduce it to a credit, it's much cleaner, and the buyer can pick their own people, their own discovery to figure out who to bring in. And so in the case where the seller is giving a $10,000 or a $15,000 or a $25,000 credit, for example, then it's prudent to have a release drawn. And it basically says, look, we had an issue, and here's all the documents we used to discover all these issues. We include all those documents in our release, and we're forever releasing each other, for this money that we're giving. And so it just makes a whole lot of sense. Now, it doesn't guarantee you're not going to have a lawsuit, because that could be a lawsuit just arguing about the release that you signed. But we have a legal service. We have an attorney on retainer so that we can offer this protection for our sellers. And it's good because it gives another defense against this potential future litigation.
And of course, you have to get the buyer to agree to it. It's not as though but of course, one can insist on it. So if I'm going to give you $20,000 credit, and you're going to need to sign this. But
yeah, I mean, if you're given that kind of money, you want to be sure you're not going to have the same problem. That you're negotiating the same problem after you give them $20,000.
All right. Well, that's been really helpful. So basically, bottom line is for sellers, as far as to increase the chances of avoiding litigation, disclose. We have documents that will help you provide any disclosure, so you'll remember things, anything that's been repaired. I know I've always had a beef on that, because my thought, well, not a beef, but let's say a window broke 10 years ago and they replaced it. You have to put that down, and you do.
I know. It's surprising that that's required, but it is. And, it's good to go get the records from the city and whatever documents are available in the public record for building permits. It's good to get a complete file, or have the buyer and the buyer's agent get that complete file from the city so that they can see what's permitted and what's not permitted. And a lot of issues with that too after the fact. Hey, you didn't permit you did something in a garage and you didn't get it permitted. And real estate agents are not trained in that area. We see those things, we learn them when we have a problem with them, but we're trained to understand how to fill out a contract and how to negotiate a transaction and how to get a buyer qualified. We're not trained in, the mechanics of a house for sure, how to build a house and, what's a good roof and what's a bad roof and how does the plumbing work. We're not trained in that area. And so there's just this underlying theme that a buyer feels they have some sort of warranty. And, you understand their logic, because in today's market, I mean, you buy a 1,500 square foot ranch style home for $1.2 million, for $1 million, you want to be sure you've gotten something, the tires aren't going to fall off the day after escrow closes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's talk about real quickly before we leave here, there's the transfer disclosure that the seller fills out. There's the seller property questionnaire that the seller fills out. There's the AVID, which is the agent visual inspection disclosure that the agent fills out. There's the natural hazards report. We'll talk about the natural hazards report, which is a disclosure.
Yeah, that's really an interesting report. It talks about all the earthquake zones and all the oil drilling and anything that's gone on in the nature of that property in that area. And it's a pretty wide zone. And so I think that's overlooked, because it's really a scientific report, but it's a good one for the buyer to spend some time studying, because it does talk a lot about the environment that's around that property.
Yeah, it'll talk about where earthquake fault zones are, if it's in a Mello-Roos. I think it says Mello-Roos, but it definitely does fire hazard zones. And I think it has 3 or 4 different degrees, or at least 3 of fire zones, extremely high fire zone, moderate, and then flood plains and flood zones. So yeah, that's a an awesome document that's provided.
It's a highly scientific report. It's very much like a preliminary title report. The title company provides a report on all the deeds and all the history of the property, and you look at that and you say, what's this meets and bounds stuff? What's all this mean? So the clients rely on us to tell them, to interpret that for them.
Yeah, they're oftentimes very, very thoroughly informed about the property, which will help all of our clients. Well, Walt, thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful. I'm sure that our audience hopefully found it helpful. And hey, subscribe to this channel or share this show to anybody who think may be interested in it. And Walt, thank you again for joining us here. This has been just a wealth of great information.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.